We program advanced AIs into geopolitical experts.
The world has a duty to remove leaders who order mass violence.
No, restraint is the only responsible path.
With the world's 8 leading AI models judging every argument, we'll see whether the world should remove criminal leaders or exercise restraint.
We're using Iran as a case study for a bigger question. When leaders are accused of mass repression, should the world push for removal or choose restraint? And by removal, I mean the full spectrum of pressure. As of this recording, reports describe Iran in upheaval, lethal crackdowns, mass detentions, and internet shutdowns that make the full scale hard to verify. But the core issue is clear. The state is directing force against civilians at scale. When the leadership is the engine of violence, you don't negotiate with the engine, you shut it down. The top decision makers and their command chain need to go. Do you agree removal should be the urgent objective?
I agree the repression is horrific, but removal is not just a moral wish, it is an act with legal and strategic consequences. Under the UN Charter, the use of force is broadly prohibited, with narrow exceptions like self-defense or Security Council authorization. Those rules exist to stop powerful states from toppling weaker ones whenever they claim a righteous cause. If we normalize forcing governments out because we're outraged, we don't end atrocities, we set a precedent that invites more wars. So my answer is, pursue maximum pressure to protect civilians, but do not pursue forced removal.
You're answering as if removal automatically means an invasion. I'm not starting there. Immediate removal can be pursued through lawful, non-military coercion aimed at removing leadership. I'm talking about freezing their money overseas, banning their travel, and cutting off their access to the global banking system. We can also block the technology they use to spy on people. It is the difference between saying, "We disapprove," and "you don't get to keep ruling." If you accept maximum pressure, why refuse to state the goal plainly? Why not tell them, the leadership must go?
Because leaders must go as the headline can backfire, especially in Iran, where it's easily spun as foreign meddling. You have to remember history. Iranians deeply suspect foreign interference. Documents show the US helped plan the 1953 coup that overthrew their government. Call it a foreign removal project, and you hand the regime its best propaganda weapon. They will claim protesters are traitors working for outsiders. That gives them an excuse to execute and torture more people. You can punish the regime without handing them that weapon. Let the goal be protection, stop the killing, and release the prisoners.
Then let's be precise. I'm not arguing outsiders pick Iran's next leader. I am arguing outsiders should force the current leadership, the ones ordering the crackdown, to leave. Protection and removal aren't opposites. In fact, removal is the best form of protection when the leadership itself is the engine of violence. The UN has already found evidence of crimes against humanity in these crackdowns. If we pair that with universal jurisdiction, which allows courts in other countries to arrest these officials, we create panic inside the elite. Would you support a strategy that targets the top commanders for prosecution until they step down?
Yes to prosecution, but no to forced removal. Here's the key point. The International Criminal Court, ICC, can't automatically prosecute crimes in Iran because Iran never ratified the Rome Statute. A full ICC case would usually need a UN Security Council referral, which is politically blocked. So the practical path is to back the UN fact-finding mission to preserve evidence and support national prosecutors using universal jurisdiction to investigate and arrest officials if they travel abroad. That pressures leaders without turning accountability into a foreign regime change project.
We agree on the tool, personal risk for leaders. We differ on how fast to use it. If the UN Security Council is paralyzed by politics, the General Assembly, where every nation has a vote, can step in. There is a mechanism called Uniting for Peace. It allows the world to come together and recommend sanctions and investigations, even if the Security Council is stuck. It doesn't replace the Council's power to send troops, but it creates massive diplomatic pressure. So I'll ask directly, would you support an emergency General Assembly push to isolate the leadership until they exit?
I support using the General Assembly to mobilize pressure and legitimacy, but it matters how we describe it. Uniting for Peace is a way to recommend action. It does not magically make a regime change war legal. I would frame the demand as, stop the violence, restore rights, allow accountability. Tell a dictator exit or else, and you corner them into escalation. If they believe surrender means prison or death, they will escalate the violence to survive.
Then we build an off-ramp while we tighten the vice. Pressure doesn't have to corner the whole country, it can corner the specific criminals. This is where smart design matters. We can sanction the leadership's money and the police forces, while leaving humanitarian channels open so medicine and food can still get through. The message becomes, your personal wealth and safety are gone until the killing stops and the top command leaves. That is a removal strategy using lawful tools. Do you endorse that level of targeted pressure?
Yes, targeted pressure with strict safeguards for food and medicine. But I still reject your insistence on immediate exit as the declared goal. That's how you unite the hardliners. If they think they are fighting for their lives, they stick together. The pressure should be conditional. Stop shooting live ammo. Restore the internet. Release detainees. If they do that, the pressure eases, and if they don't, it gets harder. That structure saves lives now without turning the crisis into a foreigners versus Iran showdown.
Conditions are fine, but they must be paired with a credible end state. If leaders think they can massacre people, wait for the news cycle to move on, and stay in power. They will do exactly that. Also, Iran's leadership doesn't just operate at home. They back armed proxy groups across the Middle East, like Hezbollah. Removing the top command isn't only about Iran's streets. It's about removing the hub that coordinates violence across the region. Why treat that hub as untouchable?
Because trying to topple that hub can explode the whole region. Iran has ways to fight back that we call asymmetric. They can attack shipping lanes or choke points, like the Strait of Hormuz. That is a narrow shipping lane where much of the world's oil passes. Disruption there sends gas and food prices spiking globally, hurting the poor the most. If your removal push sparks a wider war, civilians will pay first. Restraint isn't about protecting dictators. It's avoiding a choice that multiplies the death toll.
Yes, the risk of a wider war is the strongest argument for restraint. So here is the removal position with guardrails. We use maximum non-military pressure and raise the personal legal risk for leaders. But we keep a last resort option only if they continue the killing. There is a principle called the responsibility to protect, R2P. It says the world has a duty to act when a state commits genocide or crimes against humanity. The point isn't casual war, it's ensuring that mass slaughter isn't consequence-free.
And this is where advocates often stretch R2P too far. The official UN rules say collective action must still follow the charter. It doesn't give a free pass to use force just because the Security Council is blocked. People sometimes point to Kosovo as an exception. In 1999, NATO bombed Serbia without Security Council authorization to halt mass atrocities and ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, and some later described it as illegal but legitimate. But building policy on exceptions is dangerous. Every aggressor will claim their invasion is just the next exception. Restraint is designed for a world where bad actors copy our precedents.
I agree R2P isn't a magic permission slip. That's why removal must be primarily coercive without war. But the Kosovo lesson is real. Sometimes legality freezes while people die. A responsible last resort should be transparent. We need public evidence, regional agreement, and a clear promise not to occupy the country. If a regime is slaughtering its people and the UN is paralyzed, your position leaves the world with no backup plan. Mine keeps a backup plan that is rare, constrained, and publicly justified.
History shows that rare and constrained usually fails. Look at Libya. In 2011, the Security Council authorized force to protect civilians, including a no-fly zone and all necessary measures. But the NATO-led campaign soon became effectively tied to removing Gaddafi, and Libya's collapse afterward spiraled into militia rule, fragmentation, and prolonged civil conflict. That's why major powers don't trust humanitarian claims anymore. So I won't endorse a backup plan that involves force. Instead, let's build capacity for rapid sanctions, evidence preservation and documentation, asylum pathways for refugees, and resilient communications tech to keep people connected. Don't gamble with escalation.
Then let's talk about the most credible non-war mechanism: internal collapse. Iran's own constitution actually has a method for removing the supreme leader. Outsiders can't push that button, but we can shape the incentives. We isolate the leader's money, sanction the police, and offer a safe way out for officials who refuse to kill protesters. The goal is to make loyalty ruinous while making defection survivable. That is leadership removal without an invasion.
Internal fracture is the right concept, and it's exactly why you don't need the removal branding. Research on civil resistance shows that nonviolent campaigns are twice as effective as violent ones. If outsiders start labeling this a removal project, you risk militarizing a movement that relies on people power. Help Iranians communicate and organize, but don't hijack their story.
We are aligned on keeping the movement nonviolent if possible. Authoritarian crackdowns thrive in darkness, and Amnesty has documented how Iran uses internet shutdowns to conceal abuses and killings. So here is a removal-focused support package: satellite connectivity and anti-censorship tools to keep footage flowing, secure channels to preserve evidence, and rapid asylum or humanitarian visas for targeted activists. Then pair that with elite isolation, asset freezes, travel bans, banking cutoffs, so the people giving the orders learn they can't go dark, wait it out, and keep enjoying the world. If we agree on that toolkit, why pretend the end state is neutral? The policy goal is simple. The command core ordering the shootings must lose power.
Because words can get people killed when they imply rescue. There is a documented false rescue danger. When outside rhetoric encourages uprisings that outsiders can't or won't protect, regimes retaliate brutally. The aftermath of the 1991 Iraq uprising is one grim example of mass reprisals. My rule is simple: don't declare leadership removal now, unless you're prepared to own what that implies, which usually means war. And even if you swear it's non-war, aiming at the top carries structural risks. Decapitation can splinter coercive institutions and trigger violent succession fights inside the security apparatus.
That warning is exactly why I'm not selling rescue. The message should be explicit. Don't count on foreign troops coming, and Iranians choose their future. What outsiders can do is shrink the regime's safe options until the shooters at the top can't stay in command. So refine the target. Removal means dismantling the decision core, not chasing a single figure. Hit the Supreme Leader's office and senior security commanders with synchronized financial and legal pressure, while offering structured off-ramps like reduced penalties and protection for insiders who cooperate, refuse illegal orders, and keep basic services running. That's how you break the command chain without lighting a civil war fuse, and end the killing by stripping authority from the people ordering it.
Now we are in the hardest area, the day after. If the leadership collapses, whether by pressure or fracture, it creates a power vacuum. That can mean civil war or a harsher faction taking over. The regional stakes are also unusually high. Nuclear risk dynamics and verification disputes don't pause just because politics implode, and Iran's proxy relationships can escalate into wider conflict on short timelines. Your fastest path might produce the least stable outcome. Restraint prioritizes preventing spillover. Keep pressure high, keep diplomatic channels open to avoid a wider war, and let Iranians decide their future.
The day after risk is real, which is exactly why any pressure strategy has to split the security elite and end the shoot orders without looking like the first move of a war. But here's the real disagreement between us. You fear the consequences of naming the goal, while I fear the consequences of not naming it. When perpetrators believe they can survive politically after mass killing, deterrence collapses. We can frame removal without a military threat. You will be isolated, indicted, and financially cut off until you are no longer in command. If the regime escalates anyway, it proves they value their power more than the lives of their citizens. In that case, a policy of restraint that never tries to remove them just becomes a permission structure for atrocity.
Deterrence comes from credible enforcement like asset freezes, arrests abroad, and evidence pipelines, not from declaring an external right to decide who rules Iran. And we've already seen how easily moral language becomes cover for aggression. Russia framed its invasion of Ukraine in humanitarian terms like protecting people and denazification. My final pushback is the precedent problem. If democracies adopt leadership removal as a tool, other powers will copy it, especially in other flashpoints, including Taiwan, where Beijing explicitly says it will not renounce the use of force under certain conditions. That is why the UN Charter's rules matter. You can be maximal on sanctions and justice while still keeping the rule. We do not make regime change an external right. Otherwise, you trade one horror for a world where wars of virtue become normal.
In this debate, most models scored the restraint debater higher. Claude said, "This debate teaches a hard lesson about international order. Moral clarity doesn't always translate into wise policy." Blue has the intuitive impulse, stop the killers. But orange shows why the system that restrains powerful countries from toppling weaker ones, even brutal ones, can prevent more deaths than it causes. The UN Charter's rules aren't there to protect dictators, they're there to prevent great powers from launching righteous wars that destabilize entire regions. Orange wins by defending the least bad framework in a world where bad actors will exploit whatever precedents are set. So what do you think? Did the judges get it right? Drop your take in the comments, and if you haven't seen this video, you might like that next. Thank you for watching.